Give it one more round of applause for Dr. Kathy Hiani Brown, please. So I'm very excited to kick off our NICE conference with our first keynote plenary session panel looking at philanthropic efforts in cybersecurity. And to moderate this panel is none other than Sherry Huang, who is the Interim Program Officer for the Cyber Initiative as Special Projects Fellow at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. In her work with the Cyber Initiative, she supports efforts to build a more robust cybersecurity field and improve policymaking, and with particular focus on efforts to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. If those of you know Hewlett Cyber Initiative, you know they put their money where their mouth is. So I'm very excited to welcome Sherry and her panelists to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the keynote panel of this year's NICE conference. Today, we will be talking about philanthropic efforts in cybersecurity. Not enough people talk about this, though, and yet it's important because philanthropy is a major funding source that creates opportunities for programs and institutions to launch and scale. You will hear a 45-minute discussion with 2.5 panelists. I'll explain that in a moment. And then the floor is open to you for a 15-minute Q&A session. My name is Sherry Huang. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction. The reason we have 2.5 panelists is because I am wearing 2 hats today. So I will moderate this discussion, but I will also be donning my part-time panelist hat as the program officer of the Cyber Initiative at the Hewlett Foundation. Our foundation funds nonprofits and including universities and think tanks to build a more robust cyber policy field, both domestically and abroad. You will surely learn something from our distinguished guests here today. You will hear a deep dive into what the philanthropic sector is doing in the area of cyber training, education, and workforce development. It goes beyond that. We will have a special focus on increasing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the cybersecurity field. You're looking at 2 people here with very different perspectives. First, we have Kate Behncken, Corporate Vice President at Microsoft and the leader of Microsoft Philanthropies. She will draw back the curtain and give us a peek into the corporate funder's perspective on funding in the cybersecurity space. Kate has spent more than 20 years at Microsoft and held numerous leadership roles, including Associate General Counsel and Chief of Staff to Microsoft President Brad Smith, and has led Microsoft Philanthropies for the past 5 years. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Sherry.
Next, we have Ruthe Farmer, who will share her perspective as a field expert. Ruthe achieved success thanks to grants. She has founded the Last Mile Education Fund, which provides financial support for low-income, underrepresented students in tech, and has designed and launched numerous cyber initiatives nationally. Tech inclusion has been one of her primary focus areas. She was once the senior policy advisor for tech inclusion in the Obama White House. She was also Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at the National Center for Women in IT. This is a rare opportunity to spend quality time with 2 leaders that have such a wealth of experience. Let's dive right in. So first, I'd like for us to talk about what your organization's mission and focus in relation to funding in the cybersecurity space is. Using the Hewlett Foundation Cyber Initiative as an example, I already mentioned that our mission is to build a more robust cyber policy field, and we do that through 3 pillars, very high level. So first, we focus on a steady talent pipeline. So we've supported more than 30 universities globally in building cyber policy centers and programs from bachelor's to PhDs. Second, we build and strengthen core institutions, including major think tanks in the US and a handful abroad that focus on cyber policy research. Last but not least, we build translation infrastructure to make cybersecurity and tech policy concepts and language, which are often technical and oftentimes alienating to the public, to make it more accessible. And we do that by supporting podcasts and newsletters and bring journalists and tech experts together every year. So I'm curious about each of your organizations. In short, why do you fund and what do you fund? Kate, why don't you go first?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry, and good morning, everyone. It's really wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. Look, at Microsoft, the mission of Microsoft is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more, and we certainly see the tremendous opportunity for technology to do that. We also see the challenges that technology brings as well, and of course, everybody in this room knows more than most people that cybersecurity continues to be a really significant threat to private sector, to governments, to people around the world. And as a technology company, we very much see and understand the responsibility that we have to help address this issue. And Microsoft's been investing across the company in many different ways. In 2021, we announced a commitment, a $20 billion commitment over 5 years to invest in security solutions, $150 million to US government agencies as well. There's another problem, though, that I think we would probably all agree people aren't talking about enough, and that's the fact that there are just, as the number of cybersecurity attacks around the world continues to increase, and the attacks are becoming more sophisticated, the cyber threat landscape is becoming a whole lot more diverse, but there's just not enough people with the cybersecurity skills to help keep governments secure, to help keep organisations secure, to help keep people safe. We know that by 2025 there's going to be like 350 million open cybersecurity roles around the world. And organisations are just struggling to keep up, to find the people that have the skills to fill these roles. So last year we kicked off a national campaign here in the US, a cybersecurity skilling campaign, and our goal was to skill 250 million people, which at the time represented about half of the open roles in the US. And we really saw that community colleges could play a really important part of the solution here. And you might think, why community colleges? And it's for a couple of different reasons. They're very diverse. Every state and territory has a community college, and they're very affordable. So we're really excited to be really anchoring our initiative in community colleges. And obviously, cybersecurity is not it doesn't respect borders. It is very much a global issue, and so we took that initiative, and over the last year or so have expanded that initiative to an additional 27 countries around the world. And we chose those countries very much based on the number of cybersecurity attacks and also the size of the workforce gap.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I didn't realize that Microsoft has expanded that program internationally as well. That's very exciting to hear. All right, on to you, Ruth. How about you? And any response to what Kate just shared?
Sure. So we're the Last Mile Education Fund, and shout out Jenna, who's in the audience, who's with us as well. And our focus is really a missing gap that a lot of people didn't realize was happening, that there's been tremendous amount of work to push underrepresented students into the STEM talent pipeline over the last 30 years. You all know this. And those things are actually working. But if you look at the national data, only 20% of students in the bottom 2 income quartiles finish their degree within 6 or even 8 years. So literally, what is the point of pushing talent into a system that's going that they're going to fail at massive scale? So the last mile is literally doing that. We're funding the last mile for what we call striving students. So you've entered the pathway, you've proven yourself, we need you to finish. And so one of our biggest projects is with Microsoft. It's called the Microsoft Cybersecurity Scholarship Program. And we are on a hunt to support 10,000 community college students across the US with cash. And we give them cash because free tuition and scholarships do not put gas in your car or food on your plate. And oftentimes, the number one reason people leave their college pathway is financial stress. The number two is family obligations, which are closely tied to financial stress. And so if we can solve that simply by giving them rapid access to financial support, and I want every single institution to also offer those supports, but we're like the secondary safety net. In addition to the money that we give them, they're also getting LinkedIn Premium for a year, which the students rave about because a lot of community college students haven't actually taken that step yet. And so we're giving them a training, plus this LinkedIn Premium is like a $300 a year value. They get a bunch of other resources from GitHub Global Campus, and then many other perks that Microsoft brought 10 of them to the RSA conference in March. So more opportunities, and this has been really fantastic to invest in this population. And one thing I'll tell you is 72% of the students who apply for our help say they sometimes or always worry about having enough food. So we're out here asking young people to do, and old people, and people of all ages, to do a cognitively demanding field like cybersecurity. That's really hard to do when you're struggling with food or housing or other insecurities. And so it's really important to think about the whole student, and that's where Last Mile comes in.
Thank you. I love that you mentioned thinking about the whole student and increasingly the whole person as well. And this nicely transitions into one of our primary topics for this panel, actually, which is that the tech industry has increasingly recognized the importance of diversity in cybersecurity, but progress has been relatively slow. Ruthe, you're breaking down barriers. Smart people from underrepresented communities are working in cybersecurity thanks to your fund. Can you tell us a bit more in detail how you're doing it?
Yeah. So any cybersecurity student, whether they're doing a certificate or a degree at a community college or a two-year technical school, is eligible. And the applications are rolling. We will review every individual individually. We're not comparing them against each other. They're not, competing. They're looked at individually. Like, are you in this role? Do you need assistance? Yes, we say yes. And we get them those dollars very, very quickly, which I think is really important. But more important than that is it's extremely validating because the general scholarship universe is about outliers. And a lot of students just don't even bother applying for scholarship opportunities because they know they're so scarce that they're not going to get them and that they're not potentially good enough. Whereas we're saying, absolutely, you're good enough. You are a great investment. We're going to invest in you. And then we pull them in. We have a LinkedIn group for them. We consistently are pushing opportunities to them, whether virtual or at their institutional partners. And it's extremely validating. And one story I'll tell you that we're giving them small grants. These are like $500. It's not a tremendous amount of money to us. It is a tremendous amount of money to them. It's extremely impactful. And they mention, I'm going to use this to fix my laptop, or I'm going to use this to buy food or groceries. But one student said, thank you so much. I know this seems like a small amount of money, but it's huge to me. I was able to pay down my credit card. Okay, so she'd maxed out her credit card, so now she has access to credit. Pay back my friend that I borrowed money from. Now she's got her relationships back. And then she said, and buy a parking pass so I could go back to in-person classes. If you're not going to in-person classes, you're not the person that faculty member is going to recommend for an opportunity. You're not engaged. And that is an opportunity cost that she probably didn't even realize she was paying. And so it's really, really powerful what that intervention can do at the right time.
Thank you for sharing. I think just sharing a story of the individual really helps us and our audience think about the things that we're often missing when we're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility at a higher level. So thank you for sharing that.
And can I add one thing? Yeah. I just think the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is often totally centered on gender or race, but we don't often talk about socioeconomic status. And socioeconomic status is a critical part of DEI that it's really hard because companies can't ask that question. And a lot of institutions aren't asking those questions. They have the data, but there's a lot of shame associated with poverty. And so getting really creative about how you think about making sure that resources for underrepresented students, low-income students are underrepresented in STEM, we know this. Making sure that those resources are upfront and available, they don't have to ask for them, or that you're leveling the playing field for everybody all the time.
Totally agree with that. Just want to highlight it. All right, so Kate, Microsoft Philanthropies does so much to support cybersecurity education and workforce development. I'm not going to ask you to pick a favorite because as a fellow funder, I know that's not allowed, but tell us about a specific program that made a significant impact in increasing accessibility and diversity within the cybersecurity field.
Well, I mean, as I was saying earlier, when we took our cybersecurity skilling initiative to 28 countries around the world, when we looked at we initially chose those countries based on number of cybersecurity attacks and the size of the workforce gap. But when we looked at the data, one of the other things that all of those countries had in common was just a woeful lack of diversity. I think on average it was about 17% of all those countries, only 17% of the workforce was women. In the US, about 20% of the workforce is women. So, I think those numbers are pretty staggering, and what that data really showed us was that we had an opportunity to not just try and help grow the cybersecurity workforce, but also help diversify it. And so we thought about how can we design the program in a particular way so that we can really target women and bringing women into the workforce. And so to do that, we partner with amazing organisations, on both globally and locally, and organisations that are really focused on women. So, as a couple of examples, we partner with Women in Cybersecurity to help expand their student chapters to higher education institutions, which helps create that community, which we know is just critical to both recruiting women, into these courses, and also helping retain women once they've started these courses as well. And actually, to do a plug for a session later today, Vasu Jackal, who's the corporate vice president for security at Microsoft, is going to be speaking with the executive director of Women in Cybersecurity, Lynn Dom, I think at 11:30. So that should be a really great conversation. And then, as Ruthe was saying before, it's important not just to look at students getting the skills, but also looking at the student circumstance. And so that's why organisations like Last Mile and the incredible work that Ruthe is leading is just so important. It can be, it can be a relatively small financial grant, as Ruthe was saying, that can be the game changer for a student staying in a course. And then another partnership that we provided a grant to Turtle Mountain Community College, which is a tribal college in North Dakota, to help with faculty and content and student support. And if you're talking about great examples, and I think one of a really fantastic kind of full circle example is a person called Zach Oxendine. And he did a two-year course at Turtle Mountain Community College. He's now a cybersecurity engineer at Microsoft, and he is giving back to the community at Turtle Mountain Community College and volunteering his time. He's an incredible person. He's also an incredible speaker, and I think he's doing the keynote tomorrow at 9 a.m. and don't miss it. It's fantastic. But Sherry, that's actually how I think initially crossed paths, because you're also supporting Turtle Mountain as well.
Yes. So on the Hewlett end, we have always thought that diversity, equity, inclusion in the cyber field is important, but our journey has been an evolution. So we've been funding in the cyber policy field this is our 10th year now. And I think our approach to thinking about funding in a way that prioritizes DEIJ in a cross-cutting manner has really come to bear since 2021. So that's when we started to make a really concerted effort instead of rather than just one-off sporadic grants or providing learning opportunities to different grantee partners. So earlier this year, we announced very proudly 5 major grants to minority-serving institutions to build interdisciplinary cyber policy programs on their campuses. And this include our shared grantee partner, Turtle Mountain Community College, which is a tribal college, to launch their bachelor's in cyber law and policy program. We're also funding Florida A&M University and HBCU to launch a cyber policy institute. Spelman College, another HBCU, to launch a minor in cyber policy within their computer science department. And last but not least, Florida International University to expand and grow their cybersecurity at FIU program. We started with these 5 academic institutions because that's how the Hewlett approach usually is. We start by building core institutions, and we hope that with the seed funding and these initial programs, this will actually spur a whole ecosystem where other minority-serving institutions within the US are able to see like what they would be able to do, and maybe in 10 or 20 years, we will have a strong and steady pipeline of students coming from underrepresented communities. So that is what the Hewlett Foundation does. But we all know that when we're tackling such big problems such as workforce gaps and diversity, equity, and inclusion, like you can't do it with one organization. Like no matter how well resourced, how capable you are, one organization cannot change the world. So collaboration is one of the keys to addressing the cybersecurity workforce gap. I'd love to know how your organization has facilitated collaboration amongst industry, academia, government, and other stakeholders, which are represented in this room right here, right now, to create a sustainable cybersecurity career pathways. Kate, why don't you kick us off?
Well, I mean, collaboration is critical. I mean, this challenge is huge, and it's way too big for any one organisation. So it is, it's incredibly important to collaborate. It's why we partner with governments, with non-profits, with others in the private sector as well. It's also very much not it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and so it's really important to take a local approach and learn about what are the needs on the ground in particular communities, and what's going to work, what might work somewhere might not work somewhere else. We did partner with OECD just in terms of trying to gather some data and learn, and did a report in 5 countries, and the US was one of those countries. And importantly, the report also includes policy recommendations, which we know are critical to help driving sort of long-term sustainable change. And actually, call out, thank you very much to Marion Merritt from NICE for participating in that effort as well. And I think just also like the NICE framework, CyberSec tools also have really consistently been called out as helping to sort of navigate these cybersecurity workforce challenges. And also building awareness is really key. In the same way that we thought about computer science education with cybersecurity, building awareness for young people early is key to understand what is cybersecurity, what kind of roles are available, and getting that exposure. And there's a couple of different ways that we have been doing that. We have a program which Microsoft launched maybe about over 12 years ago called TEALS, which is all about getting computer science education into high schools across the US. And it's a super cool program. I love it because it works with the resources that a school already has, and it relies on industry volunteers. And so an industry volunteer will team teach with typically the maths or the science teacher, but we've had all different kinds of teachers. And so over time, the teacher learns how to be the computer science teacher. And so we've added some cybersecurity tracks into the TEALS curriculum, and we're in about 500 high schools across the US. But that's a really important way to try and get exposure to kids early. And then I think also JROTC as well. We funded in partnership with Computer Science for All and Ruthe, was it Computer Science for All? But that's a great program as well, also helping to try and get computer science pathways and cybersecurity pathways for so many students across the US. And one really cool thing about that, which I think we're really proud of, is that we were able to sort of help attract and secure a really significant funding from Department of Defense, which is sustainable funding. And I do think that's an example of where philanthropy can play a really important role to help fund something and prove out a model and attract additional funders and more sustainable funding as well.
Thank you. No, I totally agree with that, and not just in the US. Sometimes we have conversations with other potential funders of our grantee partners domestically and internationally, and sometimes they ask us to share our experience and like why we're funding certain organizations and projects with other potential funders, including different government agencies. And I think that is, you're very spot on, Kate. That is a role that philanthropic funders can support their grantee partners with. So Ruthe, I know that you and Kate and Microsoft Philanthropies have a shared history with JROTC. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it and talk about other cross-sector collaborations that you've been involved in, because you've been involved in a lot?
Sure. So I think the JROTC, it's like the program is titled JROTC -CS, which could be cybersecurity, which could be computer science, could be a number of things. But what was really powerful about that was there was actually a coalition of, I think, 10 to 12 different partners, not only corporate partners and funders, but also organizations like cyber.org, who I believe is here, that came together to do a demonstration project and say, look, this is how this could work in implementation, create a model that ultimately resulted in federal legislation and federal appropriations, and basically putting pressure on the JROTC to add this content to their schools. And what I think was really powerful about that project was the legislation actually read that it authorized a grant program of the DoD to fund capacity building for high demand STEM in JROTC high schools. So not just for the JROTC students, but for their high schools, which there were 545,000 JROTC cadets across 3,421 high schools, but those high schools serve 4 million kids, so there's a halo effect. And then there's a permanence in that, one example, a high school in Mississippi, Aberdeen High School, had never offered any AP course ever. And today they have multiple sections of AP Computer Science in a 100% Title I, 100% Black school in Mississippi. This is changing the state level data for computer science for the whole state of Mississippi, with just this one infusion of getting a motivated JROTC instructor to partner with their principal and their science teachers to create this pathway for their students. And across the nation, there's different examples of this. And today I know that both the Air Force JROTC continues to implement this program with their schools, and then also the Marine Corps has jumped in, and the Army has another program that they're launching, specifically cybersecurity related in JRTC high schools in the Army. And so it's created this sort of competition between the branches, which is really powerful. I love a little FOMO in the world. And then in terms of collaboration as a grantee, so we're a little different because we're a funder, we're funding students directly. What we do is give money, so we're kind of like a funder, but we also are a grantee and a recipient. But one thing that's really important with the Last Mile Education Fund is, there is an entire ecosystem of organizations working on diversity and inclusion in tech, and it's been happening for 10, 15 years. And I've been part of building it and worked with many of the people in this room for many years. And so we were very intentional about collaboration, and that we were not here to boil the ocean and try to do everything for every student that we serve, that we partner with WESIS, and every young woman that comes to us as a grantee that's interested in cybersecurity is offered a free membership to WESIS and given a warm welcome to WESIS. And so making sure that we're leveraging the partners in the community that are already doing the great work, and so we can be laser focused on what we do, which I like to say is checks, check-ins, and love at scale.
I love checks, check-ins, and love at scale. I also really liked what you talked about when you mentioned intentional collaboration. And that, for me, is the perfect segue to transition into a rapid-fire question. So I promised our panelists that today we're going to do a rapid-fire question. They're not going to know when it's going to come up, and I've asked them to keep their answers short and sweet. So here's the question, and because I'm throwing this at them, I'm going to take one for the team and go first myself to give everyone time to think about their answer. So on the topic of intentional collaboration, when exploring potential funding partnerships, for example, Kate, when you are exploring a new collaboration with a grantee partner, or Ruth, when you're exploring a collaboration with a new funder, what is the biggest positive signal for you to move ahead with this relationship? And so from my perspective, super easy. A great team is the most important. I've learned from mentors in the philanthropic sector who've worked closely with venture capitals, and I think the philosophy is the same. A team, B idea over B team, A idea any day. All right, I'm gonna pass it on to Ruth first.
Okay, so I think trust. Is there a trust-based relationship? And in practice, what that means is unrestricted funding. You believe in us, you believe in what we're doing, and there's a lot of sort of old school funders that they kind of want to get really deep into the weeds into exactly how every dime is being spent. And we want to operate more like a startup where we can pivot as we need to, and we have flexible capital that makes it possible to respond to things like the pandemic. A lot of philanthropy had to jump and change very quickly due to the pandemic, and I think we've learned a lot from that organizations with a trust relationship, you can make these investments that might have 10 years ago seemed risky, but are actually really great investments.
Thank you. On to you, Kate.
It's a great question. I would say alignment of goals and understanding of what each party the strengths that each party can bring to the table, and trust is really important as well. I think of the way that we partner, Microsoft Philanthropies, and it is important to remember that private sector can bring a lot more to the table than just funding. We always say actually that funding is often the least value that we can bring, and so we really look to partner with organisations as some strategic partners, really. And so I think when you get the alignment of goals, the understanding of strengths, and the trust, I think that's a good combo.
Thank you. Now, between the three of us, we have the key elements of a Successful partnership already. Great team, trust, and alignment of goals. So moving on, now that we've decided to move forward with the relationship, what does success look like to you? Are there any specific metrics or indicators that your organization uses to measure the success and impact of your efforts in cybersecurity education and workforce development? Just to give a bit of context, I think for us at the Hewlett Foundation, we have different measures of success at different parts of a grantee partnership lifecycle, but throughout, what I would be looking for is sustainability. So is an investment or support of a grantee partner, will that enable them to self-sustain after the initial funding period? Because as much as we wish that philanthropic resources are like infinite, they are not, they are limited. So for us to be able to catalyze different efforts, we can't support an organization for an indefinite amount of time. And so I think sustainability is something that I look to as a measure of success in the long term. So I'm going to ask Ruthe to start first. What are your measures of success?
In building the business model for the Last Mile Education Fund, we built in something we called a virtuous circle. So we're investing in young people that are going to get jobs in high demand, high paying, lucrative fields like tech. And I think our measure of success is when our alumni come back and give back to their peers. And so I'm happy to say that the first alumna to reinvest in the fund, we funded her in February of 2020. She was a senior at Spelman College and really struggling because her car had broken down and it knocked out 2 months of rent, and she was, struggling, but she was so close to the finish line. We supported her through to graduation. She's started at Microsoft in the summer, in August, and she came back in October and said, "It's the month of giving, and of course you're my first choice," and has been donating to us ever since.
Wow.
So that's just really validating. And so the other measure of success I'm looking at, and this is kind of to the employers in the room, we're doing a lot to bring more young people into the cybersecurity pipeline. I need y'all to hire them. Okay? Like, I cannot tell you how challenging it is to see these young people get certifications, get skills, and then they cannot break through to that first entry-level job. And so what I'm going to call on the employers in the world to think about is, like, how can you open the aperture in your mind to who's possible, what they might look like, and stop making your job descriptions a list of 20 things they have to know. Like, be open to training this talent, because these are resilient young people. And investing in them at this early stage, they're going to be with you for a long time. They've proven themselves. They've gotten through, struggled, got through and finished. So just open your minds a little bit to who might fit.
All right, that's a great shout out. Kate, please, measures of success.
Look, I agree with all of what you just said. Certainly sustainability is really key. Philanthropic funding can only last for so long, so I completely agree with you there, Sherry. I think we really, it's important to sort of measure progress we're not a foundation at Microsoft Philanthropies, and so, we need to go into bat for funding every year. So it is important that we can understand how impactful some of the programs are that we invest in. I mean, for the cybersecurity initiatives that I've spoken about, we're making good progress, but we have a lot to do. We set out with a target to skill 250,000 people in the US. We're tracking at about 100,000, about 400,000 across those 27 countries. Good progress and an enormous, way to go. But also, given that I mentioned earlier just about the lack of diversity in the cybersecurity workforce, we also look at making sure that the majority of all the cohorts are women. And I think an important point to remember here is it's not just about equality. I mean, study after study shows that more diverse workplaces perform better. And then also when you look at the size of the gap, I mean, we have to look at, we've got to increase the pipeline, right? So you've got to look at everybody and bring, all the talent, into these training courses and jobs.
Thank you. So, reminder for the audience, we are going into Q&A in about 2 questions. So if you have questions of your own, please start thinking about them, and then we will transition smoothly after these 2 questions. So with the rapidly evolving nature of cybersecurity, how do you ensure that the programs and initiatives, or even individuals that you support, remain relevant and adaptable to emerging needs and technologies? Kate, can you start us off?
Well, I mean, technology sure is evolving rapidly, and so it's really important that the skills and the courses keep up with that. I think we think about partnering with partners that are agile. It's one of the reasons that we thought that community colleges could be a really important part of the solution. There's an ability to be agile with the two-year courses, and also I think tools like the NICE framework, which is an adaptive framework, is really important as well. Key, of course, is making sure that educators are also that there's resources available for educators. So one of the things we do at Microsoft, we have a program, Microsoft Learn for Educators, which is continually updated based on Microsoft security certifications. So I think thinking about the resources that are available for teachers is really critical. And of course AI. AI is going to be really important for all sorts of professions, including cybersecurity. I think that everybody is going to need some level of AI fluency. So I think that that will be also important, and that's something that we're focused on for the year ahead.
Thank you. Ruth?
Sure. So our focus is a little different, obviously, because we're specifically working with students. But I think the key is communicating with them. So once we, give them a grant, they're part of our family and they're part of our alumni, and that means connecting them to great partners like Microsoft that have resources like their Shadowhunter competitions and other places where they're offering learning opportunities and resources, as well as other partners in the ecosystem that have content and or opportunities for students, especially the community type organizations like LISA's, And I want to say the one thing on the women in cybersecurity. Gender diversity, super important. Diverse teams make better stuff, yes. But also, it's just math. They're literally more than half the population and the largest college-going population in the United States. Like, put aside any kind of issues you have with diversity and inclusion and wokeness or whatever. The bottom line is most of the people we aren't currently leveraging are women. That's the fastest way we can get to scale is to leverage that group. So it's just math, seriously.
And math is important. All right. Transitioning to our last question, one for each panelist. So, Kate, what advice would you give to other philanthropic organizations or industry arms looking to support cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development?
I think one of the most important things is to really listen and learn at the community level. One of the most important things I think we did when we were thinking about our cybersecurity skills initiative is the team went out on a listening tour and went and spoke to 15 community colleges across the country. And it was really through those conversations that we heard what community colleges really needed. Teacher training, content, a community and student support. And if we hadn't done that, we might have designed the program differently, and it might not have been helpful. So I think taking the time to really connect at a community level, and also learn from experts. It's why we partner. We love partnering with Ruthe and love partnering with Last Mile Education Fund and so many different organisations. The American Association of Community Colleges was a fantastic partner as we were thinking about this work. So, tap into to the experts. And I think actually this conference is a really fantastic way to connect and meet people and learn.
No, I completely agree with you. When we were embarking on our funding for minority serving institutions, we also went out and talked to like more than 30 grantee partners and experts in the field, and also like did a listening tour with the different potential minority serving institution grantees. And I agree with you, like our design of our program and our funding would have been really different had we not had those conversations and learned from the stories and experiences of those that are in the different communities. All right, so Ruth, what advice would you give the audience working in the cybersecurity field and potentially seeking funding?
Well, number one is don't forget about the low-income students in your program design, right? When you're designing for DEI, think about socioeconomic status. Happens to be heavily correlated to race, so it's useful for diversity from that perspective, but this is a population that has been missed. And I think abundance, like we as an organization, abundance is our primary focus. We give with abundance, we think about our students from an abundant viewpoint and give them a lot of grace, and so I'd suggest that funders especially think about that in their approach, and that grant seekers, what we have done for the last 50 years to increase diversity and inclusion in the STEM fields has not yielded enough gains. So it's time to be a little bit disruptive. So let's not do the same things we've done for the last 40 years. Let's do some things that are different, which is why Last Mile is coming at this like completely. I don't even ask the students for their GPA. I do not care. If you are in a program and you want to finish, I want you to finish. And I'm not putting up gates to keep you from succeeding because you're not, quote, good enough yet. And so that is a very disruptive way to approach giving scholarships. So like think about how could you do something very different than what you've done in the past and just see if it works.
Thank you for sharing. All right, now we're going to open it up to the room for questions. Before we start taking questions, brief reminder to everyone, please keep your questions as questions and not comments, because we want to take as many questions as possible from our audience. And if you can, please introduce yourself shortly before you ask the questions. And I already see some hands in the room.
Is there somebody with mics?
Do we have mics? Oh, Randy will help us with mics. Yes, please. Sure, I can hear you.
My name is Matt Cussler, and I'm at Pittsfield State College, teaching cybersecurity there. I've had a career, though, in government and in the commercial world as well. And one of the biggest issues I'm seeing with the students is they get their 2-year degree, and they try to get a job, and everybody wants to find a 4-year degree with these folks, or a lot of experience with them. And are you starting to see now businesses welcoming the 2-year degree folks, or folks that are just starting? Because how are they going to get this experience, or those type of things to meet the requirements? Like the government's really hard to get a job with because you have to have a 4-year degree just to even open the door on a lot of stuff. So in these areas, have you seen that, or what are you doing to help try and spread that information?
Thank you, Matt. I'd actually love to hear from both of you, like Kate from the corporation perspective and also Ruth from the student perspective. What are you seeing about 2-year degrees versus 4-year degrees when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great point, and I think it it goes back to something that Ruth was saying earlier, just the importance of skills-based hiring, as well as really critical. And I think that we're seeing that there's more openness to skills-based hiring, more openness to 2-year, but there's a long way to go. I will say that. But we're getting there. I mean, I mentioned Zach Oxendine before, who did a 2-year course at Turtle Mountain Community College. He's now in a cybersecurity engineer at Microsoft. So there's one great example. But definitely, I spoke last week with a group of leaders from Australia and New Zealand, and there's definitely more conversation happening. But I will say there's a long way to go, and so I think everybody in this room can help, can really help with that. And I know Ruth will have many thoughts on this.
Well, one piece of good news is there is some effort on the federal level to change some of the requirements for hiring, which is really great because, a lot of those categories and rules on qualifications for federal jobs are a bit antiquated and haven't kept up as fast as technology has changed. And so there is some good news on that front coming down the line. I'm sure some of the federal people that are here have more details than I do, but I've heard it's happening, which is exciting. I see it a lot. I'm on lots of Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups and everything with students where I see them lamenting not being able to find a job. And we've surveyed our grantees, and finding a job is a really difficult part of the process. So I think it's going to be really critical for people in industry to leverage their social capital to pull up these students. If that means mentoring them, you can sign up for the GMI Global Mentoring Initiative, which Microsoft also sponsors and we partner with, and get matched to mentor some of these students and give them your advice and your help, and literally just use your social capital to get them into a job.
Thank you. And the only thing I would add is, the fact that we're having this conversation and this has been raised as a question in this room is a really good start. For shout out to all the employers in the room. Think about what we're talking about today and open your mind to the 2-year degrees versus the 4-year degrees, and just starting to think about it and starting to have these conversations will keep us moving in the right direction. All right, another question. Thank you. Great.
Yeah, so we have the 3 questions here. Let's take all 3 of them at once if we can, and then
Yes.
We'll close out for this session.
All right.
Okay, Morgan Zantua, City University of Seattle, and we're working on some competition research and some other things. We all, as schools, have individuals or stories of successful candidates. However, it's not enough. How do we scale to get more of everybody employed? Because we're turning out the talent, but they're not landing the jobs.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Keith Davis, represent the Camden Dream Center Technology Training School in Camden, New Jersey. Have you yet explored what it would look like to identify robust, community-based organizations across the country to serve your mission? And I applaud you for the efforts with regard to HBCUs, et cetera. But across the country, we know, I'm a Cisco partner, so I got the nation. There are robust, community-based organizations that are looking for the kind of support and philanthropy that you have capacity to provide.
Deepak Pravin from University of North Texas. My question is, would you be supporting any apprenticeship programs through your philanthropic foundations? Thank you.
Sorry, one more. Chalessa White with MITRE supporting NIST and the NCCOE. My question is, have you thought about supporting, I know we talk about career pathways, have you thought about supporting middle school teachers and middle schoolers to get that pathway started? I mean, I think it starts at that level. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, 4 great questions. I'm getting the hint from Randy that we're running short on time, so I'm just going to ask our panelists to pick the questions that they would like to answer. Hopefully we'll cover all 4 of them. So the first question is, how do we scale? The second question is, are there community-based organizations across the country that we can support to further our mission in DEIJ in the cybersecurity workforce? There was a question related to apprenticeship programs, and are we doing anything right now? Do we have plans to support them in the future? And also, what do we think about middle school teachers and students starting the pipeline early? All right.
So related to the middle school students, I'll just share, if you're not familiar with CS for All, the organization, csforall.org, they're a coalition of every organization doing K-12 computer science, cyber tech education. And so definitely lots of work going on related to building the pipeline early. There's also lots of great organizations like Cyber Girls and Project Cyber and others that are inspiring young people at that level. So definitely the resources are there, and I recommend checking out csforall.org to identify those partners in your communities.
Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I think on the scale question, I mean, certainly from the skilling angle, that's one of the reasons that we were interested in partnering with community colleges, and we're looking at equivalent systems, TVET systems outside the US, because that's I think where we feel like that can help us scale in terms of skilling. As I mentioned earlier, with community colleges being in every state and territory, being affordable, being more diverse. So I think from a corporate perspective, we think about what are the organisations that we want to partner with that can help bring that scale.
So does Microsoft do anything or have any thoughts on apprenticeship programs?
Yeah, I mean, we have a apprenticeship program called LEAP. I think apprenticeship programs are incredibly important. Having travelled to other countries where they're, like, I remember being in Switzerland where the apprenticeship program is just so baked, such a part of the way companies work. There's a lot of investment for apprenticeship programs, and it's how a lot of the big companies hire. I think there's a real opportunity for more investment programs, more appreciation of pulling students through those programs into private sector in the US as well.
Thank you. And from the Hewlett side, we don't fund apprenticeship programs directly, but in the conversations that we're having with government partners, industry partners on cyber workforce, apprenticeship programs come up regularly, and I think there are a lot of brilliant minds putting their head together to think about what does that look like in practice. So there is definitely discussion on that already, and I'm excited to see what are the actual programs that will come out of that. Any thoughts on community-based organizations to support DIJ? I can jump in first, and if you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear it. So other than minority-serving institutions, the Cyber Initiative at the Hewlett Foundation has also been thinking about supporting, as you say, community-based organizations. There's many different ways to define what a community-based organization is, but we think about it in the sense that, okay, now we have a talent pipeline, but how are we able to support the students and faculties from these minority-serving institutions in the field? So, I think DIJ is not just about diversity, it's also about inclusion and feeling like you belong. Once you're in this field, what are the community-based organizations that will help you get exposure to different opportunities, to peers and mentors in this space? So we are also partnering with different grantee partners that serve as nodes or hubs for different communities to convene around and find community in that.
So on the community-based organization thing, I think this is a really untapped opportunity because, I was at the Girl Scouts for many years, and I was like, okay, if we want to scale tech education for girls, we have millions of girls meeting every week in the Girl Scouts. This is like a distribution channel. This is like literally the Walmart of youth education in terms of girls. And yet over here, people are building sort of a Radio Shack. Like, I'm going to build this one little program just for girls in cyber. when we've got girls. So now I'm happy to say Girl Scouts has 78 badges in cybersecurity, computer science, and engineering now at every age level. Yay! That girls can do all the time. So the same thing with community-based organizations, like go where the people are. So if you're looking to employ people in an apprenticeship program, for example, go to the public housing community services center and recruit people. Go to the community organizations and partner with them. So I would say if your institution's in the room as you're recruiting students, go partner with those community-based organizations that are providing public services and resources, because then you can kind of do a 360 surround and support them on all sides.
I love that. I love the 360 support. We are coming up on time, so I'm just going to ask our panelists here to finish with one sentence on what would you like the audience today to walk away with?
Just what a critical issue this workforce gap is. I mean, just if you remember one number, remember 350 million open cybersecurity roles by 2030. This is such an important issue. We all need to come together to really help, as I said earlier, keep organisations and governments secure and help keep people safe.
Thank you. Ruth?
Please tell everyone that you come across about the opportunity from the Last Mile Education Fund, and I will shout out Houston Community College in the room, who has had 73 of their students receive grants from the Microsoft Cybersecurity Scholarship Program. Prince George's, Howard, Portland, Wake Technical, Coastline, and Ivy Tech are all in the top 10 in the room, so congratulations to you. And don't forget, so I'll just read you this quote. Thank you so much. This is such a great opportunity for me in this field. This opportunity is very encouraging for women, students like myself, to stay focused on our goals. The grant and the access to these resources is so helpful. Having a premium LinkedIn will be so nice for my internship and job searches. Like, we invested literally $500 in that student, and the impact it has had on her ability to persist, as well as her belief in herself, is huge. And so do not hesitate. If you feel like you need to give someone a compliment or a little bit of encouragement, just do it. It's free to you. Just encourage them and encourage them to come get some of our money.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you all for the excellent questions and the time that you spent with us today. We were able to deep dive into the role of philanthropy in supporting cybersecurity talent. We also heard specifics on how we can all increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the cybersecurity field. I personally will remember focusing on the whole student and the whole person for a very long time, and I hope you all will walk away from the session with something memorable of your own. Please join me in thanking our conference hosts and, most importantly, our superstars panelists, Kate and Ruth. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry.